everyone. Welcome back to another continuing education check-in. As you can see today, it looks a little different, but that's because we have our very first guest on our podcast. And Sania and I are super excited to introduce Lydia. Lydia, if you want, you could do a short introduction. How do we know you, and what kind of stage of life are you in right now?
Sure. Thank you both, Ethan and Sania, for having me on this podcast. I am very excited. I've been following and listening to this podcast since the beginning and very excited to be a guest today. Just a little bit about me. I am born and raised in the Bay Area and currently live in the peninsula with my husband and two very young children. For context of this podcast, I have done my fair share of dating. I didn't get married until I was 34. So depending on culture or, what stage of life that could be considered early, late, normal, it's kind of all over the spectrum. But did my fair amount of dating through my 20s and didn't meet my now husband until I was 31. And we dated for a couple of years even before we ended up getting married.
Cool.
So that's a little bit about my background from at least from a dating perspective. Anything else, Ethan and Sania, that I should give background on?
No, that's good. Because we don't want to give away too many details yet.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask you, Lydia, as someone who's married now with young kids, when you listen to our podcast, so far we've been really focusing on the basics of dating, first dates. Do you think, or have you been enjoying what you've been listening to? Do you find it relatable, or what is getting you to listen to the podcast, being in a different life stage right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say that there's a universal desire for everyone to be loved, to be known and to be loved. And the way you need to do that, I guess, in our culture right now is that you have to go through this means of dating. And yes, there are various means of dating, but everyone desires that. And so this is why I think it's such a hot topic. There's so many books written about it. There's interesting topics, but everyone has different experience because everyone's different. But I do think that there are general principles that are really important to talk about that a lot of people don't talk about. And I think that's what draws me in. And again, I kind of wish I had a podcast of experiences to listen to. And of course, again, as I mentioned, it looks really different. It could look really different per stage of life, the region area that you're in, maybe cultural and social norms that are in your communities as well. But I do think that it's important to talk about it. Because if you don't talk about it, how else are you going to learn? And then everything becomes a taboo. So I'd say to bring it into light, so to speak, right? Honestly, again, everyone desires to be loved and known. And so right now the means to do that is through dating. And as someone who, again, did my fair amount of dating, I feel like I don't mind sharing my experiences for those who are interested in hearing. I don't want to presume that everyone wants to hear them, but if you would like to, I have my own experiences as well.
Okay, that's great. And we're glad that we're providing a platform for us to allow other people to share their stories too. Before we get started, so today's topic is the always go on a first date rule. And Sania and I, we came up with this idea because we learned that Lydia, when she was dating, always had this rule and stuck by it. And before we get into that, we also have a fun segment at the end where we talk about our dating horror stories. But does anyone have any tea that they want to share before we jump into things?
I have some tea, but I don't think it's ready to be shared yet. I'm still kind of in the thick of it. And I feel like once I come out on the other side, I'd be able to talk about it more.
Dang, can you kind of give us a hint?
Yeah, it's about the guy that I was talking about in the last episode, and just about, knowing when to end things and how to end things and the whole process. of that and how challenging it can be is sort of what I'm navigating right now.
Sania, I think you should listen to episode 10. I think that might help you a little bit.
That's what, and it helped
Okay.
initiate everything. So thanks, Ethan.
I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. We'll have to find out when you update us. Okay, so let's get into this episode. So, Lydia, when you first told me that you had this rule when you were dating, kind of blew me away. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about this rule where you always said yes to a first date. What circumstances did it apply to, and how did this rule even come about?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're right. There are some like facts and circumstances surrounding that. So like I do think when you say always, there is a little bit of an asterisk star to that always. So generally speaking, I did have a rule that I would always say yes to a first date. With the caveat that I knew that there was a foundational base of core values that I knew that were being met. So as a faith-based person, it was really important that whoever I ended up marrying long term or being with long term, that we need to have the shared faith, right? And so as long as I knew that we had a same shared faith background and seriousness, then I would always say yes. So with that being said, that still does kind of narrow it down a little bit, but it's one of those things where if I knew that it was going to be a deal breaker, there was no point in going on that first date in the first place. So just I wanted to lay that groundwork because I do think that's a really important distinguisher. Because if I knew like it would just never work out, that's not always the always, right?
Yeah.
But I would say that it kind of came about probably in my mid to late 20s. Maybe like when I was 24, 25. And
Me too.
I had realized that what's that?
We're saying that's us.
Yeah. It was mostly because I actually got some advice from someone who was older. And we were talking about dating, and they gave me this advice of like, Lydia, like you just never know. Like you might be friends with them for a while, but you never see them in that context, right? So like, why not give them a shot, especially if they're willing to ask and put themselves out there? I know that it could be potentially really intimidating with the norms of like of a guy having the confidence to ask out a girl. And in the community that I was in, it became like this big deal of like whenever a guy would ask out a girl, and like we were all trying to change that culture to kind of like normalize it, because if it's going to become such a big deal, people aren't going to do it, and then you're just like not going to date, and you're just like at the standstill, and you're never really making any progress. So I had someone older and wiser tell me that like, why not? Because you just like never know. Like you really like suddenly like they might be seen as a friend in one light, like one day when you're in a social setting and you didn't think of them as like potentially attractive in that way, and then suddenly like you see them in a different context of like a romantic context, and you're like, huh, this maybe could work, maybe, right? And then with that different context, you're like, okay, maybe this could keep going. And so that's kind of where like the first date kind of came from. Because we just never know.
Sania, I know you don't really have this same rule, and I was wondering what you think of this, and if you think you would ever be down for this kind of rule.
I think I like how Lydia was talking about, because you just never know who that person is. And I think I'm often at my immature age really quick to judge and be like, oh, no, like you're my friend. Like there's no way this is happening. And like really easy and rushing kind of almost to say no to people unless like that perfectly packaged box that like, meets all the requirements comes along. But I think you are, I don't know, I'm listening to this now and I'm like, man, like maybe I should have been saying yes to a few more people like along the way, just because of this thing of you never know. Because I did a little bit of like dating on like the apps, and I always tell my roommate about like this one guy that it was like a Friday after work, and I just didn't have the energy in me to like, like shower and get ready and like go on this date. And I really like, there was not a bone in my body that wanted to do it. I don't know why I did. I don't know if because he followed up or something. And it was like the best date of my life. Like to this day, that date has not been topped. Nothing came of it because he ended up moving. But
Wow.
it was really like, it was like, oh wow, like I'm really glad I said yes that time.
Yeah, that's great. And so now I'm kind of wondering, Lydia, you were on the dating apps for a short period of time. Did
Mhm.
this rule ever apply to the dating apps? I feel like it's way harder to gauge if someone has similar values to you when you're meeting online versus if you are in the same like community or circles.
That's a really great differentiator, actually. You're right. I was on the dating apps for a very short amount of time. I think maybe it was like 2 months. That's like very short in the grand scheme. I would actually even say 2 months might even be an exaggeration. Um, I just realized that dating apps wasn't really for me. And so this rule, I don't know if I should call it a rule, but this principle that I abided by was a lot of the times was within the community or being set up. I was a huge fan of being set up. I've noticed, and I actually noticed this with myself as I like transition through stages of life. People who are in committed relationships love setting up other people up. Like I realized that like even myself, something shifted where I'm like, yeah, I love to set people up, but like I didn't want to do that when I was single. So something happened, and so I was like basically farming out my dating needs to my friends who were in committed relationships. And a lot of people were like, yeah, we'd love to. And, we'll look into see who our network is. And so it mostly applied to that. It wasn't applying to the dating apps because that is, to your point, very hard.
Yeah.
But I do want to call out and say that a first date should just be like, it's okay. Now, there's not a lot of investment in a first date. I think that's another thing, like a principle. Like, what's the harm of an hour coffee, right? It doesn't need to be like a 5 hour like dinner activity after drinks. Like that's pretty exhausting. But like to figure out ways to make it, just figure out whether or not you would want to talk to them again. In that first date, like if the first date was like kind of good enough, right? Then you're like, maybe this would be worth another like second hour long date.
Mm-hmm.
And Philip, my husband and I, we did things differently. Where like actually our first date was like one of my best first dates as well. But we never actually planned all the subsequent activities. We had like a really short activity at first, but it was good, so it kept going.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that's like an interesting thing to like when you think about how you use your time, especially with dating apps. You can have like a big volume. You have a lot of quantity, but not necessarily a lot of quality, or you don't know if there's quality. It's an unknown.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, your first date with Philip was going on a run.
Yes.
And
yes.
And then you got ice cream after or something?
We got dinner, which then turned into ice cream also.
Oh,
I was hungry after the run, so I was like, I'm going to keep eating.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, I think you make a great point, Lydia. A first date should just be getting to know the other person, seeing if you want to see them again. And it doesn't have to be anything big. And you're like kind of pushing for this 1 hour kind of coffee date. As a guy, like, and this is for Lydia and Sania, how would I ask or even propose this kind of date? I feel like if I just ask someone out, I would feel a lot of pressure as a guy to plan a nice first date, especially if I've known you already, or even if we're set up, I don't want to do something nice. And I would feel like you expect that too. So is there a different way I should ask someone out if I just want to get to know them better over coffee?
Sonia, do you have any thoughts? I feel like I need to think about this for just a moment. Yeah.
Part of me is thinking I should just go up to them and say, I think you're a really cool person. I would like to get to know you a little better and see if there's like any chemistry between us. Would you like to grab coffee for an hour sometime? And so I wouldn't label it maybe as a date, but when I say it like that, I feel like I keep the stakes low, but I still make my intentions uh, clear, I think.
Maybe just not specifying like, oh, can we get coffee for an hour? Like maybe you could just leave it at,
Yes.
we should go grab coffee so that they don't feel like they're being
Mm.
scheduled into a tight space of your day.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
And it also doesn't make it seem like a meeting. You're like,
Yeah.
can I send you a Zoom invitation at this time for us to meet, in which we can go through our like 5 points that, I have on my agenda.
Yeah.
We're in this world of like meetings, and so
Yeah.
I would agree with Sonia that it doesn't seem like I'm scheduling you in my very busy schedule.
Yeah, I apologize. That was the engineer coming out in me. Okay, so everyone who's listening to this podcast, you heard it here first. If you like Lydia, go hit her up to set you up with someone. She's in that stage of her life.
I would love to. And also, I think it's important to say that if you do want to go through that principle of being set up, you got to be open to being set up, though. Because, like, if you're not being open to be set up, it doesn't really work out for everybody. But I am a big fan of it because you are outsourcing your needs. Like, it's literally like someone else is doing all the work for you.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you still have to go on the date, but
Yeah.
it's just like using your network.
Yeah. Okay. Do you guys think there's any difference between a girl accepting every single first date that comes about versus a guy going on first dates all the time? And I guess for a guy, you don't want to be asking out multiple people, and so you wouldn't be in the situation if you're just looking around in your social circle. But I guess as a guy on a dating app, when I'm talking to multiple people at once, if that's how I'm approaching the dating apps, should my goal be to go on a first date with every girl that I'm talking to? Let's say our values do align and I feel like there's some kind of basis, but maybe I'm not attracted to every single person. Do you think this idea would still apply to someone like me?
So I think it's important to differentiate between whether or not it's like within the dating apps and not within the dating apps. Because again, it's just like a different platform. And it's a different vehicle. And so I wouldn't necessarily say it would be the exact same. And I know that, Philip and I had very differing views coming into dating. Like I don't think he would necessarily say that he would abide by that same principle. Because he was approaching dating differently, and culturally I do think it's different as a guy. I hate to say that. I really wish like it is 2024. We can say like, yeah, like everything is the same, but it's really not. I think it's naive to say that. And I think for you, Ethan, like I would say that it's not to just ask out any other girl, but to also be deliberate about who you ask. So because then you kind of like, I don't want to say weed it out. That's like the wrong terminology, but you've like been deliberate about who you've asked. So like say it's just like a friend in a friend group. Like you're not just like machine gunning like every single girl, right? You're like, well, girl A didn't work. Let's go to girl B. Girl B is like, oh, it didn't work that. It's girl C. And they're like all within your network. That could, potentially backfire, you don't want to make a big deal out of first dates, but it's probably not the best way to go about things. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, again, every experience is different, but I imagine you don't want to like go through like if you're like in a community group or a life group, like to go through like every single girl in your group. And it could work out, but it could just be kind of awkward too. So I would just add that as a note. And I'm not sure if I actually answered your question there. I think it is different though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sonia, do you have a take on this and
Yeah,
even like how you would feel being approached?
yeah, I think I was gonna say I completely like agree with Lydia. I think as a guy, like it's your job to sort of like pick and choose who you are really interested in, right? Because in the beginning, you're doing a lot of the pursuing. And then as a girl, we can appreciate the effort that you're putting into it because you have to be brave, like Lydia was saying earlier, to ask somebody out. And there has to like, you asking someone out should make them feel valuable, I guess. And so if you're asking out every single girl, like if you're, whether in your community group or in your dating app, if you're just going down the list and like setting up dates with people that you're not excited for, I think that would backfire for you and for the girl because maybe she's excited because you asked her and maybe she wants to say yes. So I think you should wait until you're really excited about it and you should be really picky. I think girls in general are like naturally really, really picky. So we don't typically say yes to all of the people that try to pursue us and ask us out. And so that's why I think Lydia's rule is really applicable to us to just be a little bit more open-minded and give people chances.
Yeah. I think something that I'm realizing is that this is kind of unfair. Just because I think what I'm realizing right now is that as a guy, I need to be deliberate and I should be intentional and I should be only asking out people that I'm excited about and that there's been some kind of foundation. But then for a girl, you don't necessarily have to be as excited about it. But when these opportunities come, I think we're pushing that you should give it a chance.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. It's unfair, right? Like it's when and if you grow up in like a certain culture too of like women are told to like just wait to be chosen or whatever that is, which I disagree with. Women have many choices and they're active in making their choices. It kind of sucks, but I do think that deliberateness on the guy's part, kindness, open communication goes a long way. Setting appropriate expectations. It's there's like a pacing to it all too. Again, every relationship kind of does things differently based off the people who are in it and based off of their experiences. But like, what does it mean to be kind through it? So that means like being open about what your expectations are and like not being, and like if you like suddenly realize like you're just not into it, like better to like end it sooner rather than later, even though like you don't want to hurt the person's feelings. Like little things like that. What does it mean to be kind? What does it mean to be deliberate? Like be interested, realize that you really actually want to talk to them and you're just not like one of many. And so I do think that it is different and I think that's unfortunate. And I would totally am pro, like, actually, I think I'm pretty pro, like if women are interested to ask out a guy, but it's still different. And also like there's a level of confidence that comes with that. And I don't know how many, depending on your community of folks, how confident you are to do that. Based off of my experience, I never did it for my experiences. So I really can't speak. But I wish in my dating life, I was confident enough to do that though, when I reflect back on it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And if you are interested in like thinking more about this, listen to episode 7, Who Should Make the First Move. Sania and I talk all about that. Okay, let me flip the script though. As a guy, there's some situations where I can tell that someone is interested in me, and I might be a little delulu, right? Maybe I'm not reading all the signs right, and maybe she's not actually into me. But sometimes, like I get that sense. And we should have another episode where we talk about how to tell if someone is actually interested. I mean, we've touched on this already a little bit, but in those situations, let's say someone I know, I can tell that she's interested, she's being flirty, and like trying to continue the conversation outside of when I normally see her. In those situations, let's say I don't have feelings for her, but I know our values align. Should I be giving that a shot? But the difference is that I would be the one who has to initiate and get the ball rolling, right?
So, do you have thoughts?
That's like a really tricky situation that Ethan just
I know.
I would say, Ethan, if you do have the same values, and you said they're talking to you outside of when you normally talk to them, but you're also talking to them, right? So if there is if you feel like there's potential, I think you should ask them out. Like if you enjoy those extra talks that you guys are having and you like spending, because like you already have the same values, so that's like check. But it's like next step. Do you like them beyond just their values? Like, do you like, because a lot of people could maybe have the same values as you, but do you like this one particular person? And it's like, do you like them enough to ask them and potentially be turned down? Because it's really risky to ask people out. Like I have done it in the past and it's really, really nerve wracking. So it's like, do you like them enough to deal with potentially hearing a no? Yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's super solid. Could you like talk about your mindset for you, Sania, being the one who's asking them out?
So I've only I've done it a couple of times. Do you think the
guys always give you a chance?
No, my first relationship actually, I think I've talked about him so much on this podcast, but I asked him because I really I think I'd liked a lot of people in my life, but this was the first person that I was like, no, like I really am in love with this guy. And like we were just part of the same friend group, like we used to hang out from time to time, but I was like, this one just feels so different. And the reason that I went and asked him is because I think I was feeling like I was starting to feel really sad and like unhappy when I would hear about him talking to other girls or to be doing all of this stuff. And so I was just like, okay, I like him and I want him to know my feelings. And I want to know if he even has any feelings like that towards me. And even if he says no, it's better that I get it off my chest and give him the opportunity to answer. And I was a little delulu and I was like, what if he says yes? Which he didn't at first, but yeah.
I appreciate that. You're shooting your shot, man. Like, you 100% of the time don't get the things you don't ask for, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And I generally take that, that principle with when it comes to work, doesn't hurt to ask. They could say no, but what's the upside? The upside's pretty great.
Right.
But it does, again, when it comes to dating and your emotions, it's a lot harder,
Yeah.
I would second what Sania said. Do you just like spending time with them? Do you enjoy their company? If you're already talking to them outside of the standard places you might see them, but what is it that you what is it about them that you may not necessarily feel a spark? Is it a physical attractiveness, or is it they're boring, right? You don't enjoy talking to them? I would think through some of those things, because I think that's important to figure out, if I enjoy spending time with them, we have the same value set, let's explore a little bit more what that looks like. And Philip and I are very different, but Philip and I could talk for hours, kind of in our first dates. And I am more chatty than he is. And Ethan, Philip. And all I wanted to do was talk to him. That's all I wanted to do, and to me that was oh, I'm interested in him. I want to get to know him better. I want to know what makes him tick. And so I think that there's just that basic question, do you want to spend more time with them?
Yeah. Last question before we wrap things up. But let's say as a girl, you're being asked out and you're like, okay, let me give this rule a chance and I'll just say yes and see where things go. Beyond just deciding if you want to get to know them better, if you like your interactions, is there anything else that you should be looking for just so that you don't like lead them on or get too far down a rabbit hole?
I do think that after you, like, you say yes to the first date, and like say like you're like, oh, I'm interested in doing a second date, I think like kind of that's enough time if you're like really not feeling it to like be okay with them. Like, I think I'm okay. Like, we can part our ways. It requires a little bit of reflection as well, you know, to make sure that like you're being deliberate with it. But you know, I had like a couple of first dates here and there where I was like, I knew like 15 minutes and I was like, I you're a very nice person, but not for me. And and then there are times where like we like the individual try to like extend the date. I'm like, no, I thank you, but like no thank you, right? And then like that was like a very pretty clear, like, okay, like we're gonna close this chapter of us in this romantic setting. And there are other times where I went on maybe like 3 dates with a person and I was like kind of like this person, I was like clearly more into them than they were into me. And I was like a little bummed out because it was like 3 or 4 dates in. And I think like, and again, there's not always like hard and fast rules with this, right? Like it would have been a little easier for me if it was after like the second date, you know? But I do think there's like an aspect of like having to normalize what dating looks like. Girls not jumping in right away to be like, I'm in this, right? Because that was kind of my like MO. I was like, I'm in this. I hate dating, right? I want to be in a relationship. And so I think it to be kind, to be deliberate, I think that is helpful. So I'd say that.
I think that's a great point. And I think that's a really great way to differentiate if you're looking for something serious or not. If you hate dating, then you're ready for something serious. But if you're enjoying the dating process, doing fun things with strangers, then you're probably not quite there yet.
I love the way you said that. Fun
I
things
think,
with strangers.
because I know a lot of people in, especially our life stage, Sania, like they just want to go on fun dates. They don't really care like who it's with, and it's just fun for them to do new activities and have maybe someone else pay for it.
It's interesting because someone actually said this opinion to me, which I like totally disagreed with. But they were like, like every first date is infinite potential, right? And I was like, every first date is me repeating myself over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Right. Which is part of getting to know each other. Right. But like, here's my spiel, right? You try to make it authentic, right? But it's kind of the same thing. And so it's a different perspective because again, that individual saw that as the sky's the limit and who knows where this can take it. So it was a very it was very like the glass is half full. And from my perspective, it was like, this is a means to the end because I would desire something different at the end. So it could be different, but I mean, I to your point, like I didn't really want to go do things with strangers, right? Like I didn't want more friends, right? I wanted like a spouse. I desired that at the end.
Nice, and you got it. Okay,
it was a gift. It's a very gift.
Yeah.
Okay, well, in the interest of time, we're gonna wrap it up here. And if you guys really like what we've talked about, definitely comment back below or down below, and then we can get Lydia back. But Lydia, thank you so much for carving out the time to be here. We're gonna do a very short, quick end segment for this episode, and we're calling it First Date Horror Stories. But we're doing a little bit of a competition, and so we're each gonna share like a quick horror story from our first date, and whoever has the best horror story is gonna win this candle. Shout out to Carissa for this candle. So I would deliver it to the winner or just keep it. But I'm gonna start. We're probably not gonna like comment on each other's stories, but just for me, I once went on a first date and the girl would not stop talking about herself. Like we talk about yapping, but this is like yapping to the millionth.
Ooh.
And it was crazy. Like I think for me, I'm good at creating conversation, and that's why I thought I could do this podcast with Sania in the first place. But I didn't know I was that good where I just felt like I was asking questions, but I didn't get a chance to talk about myself at all. And it was pretty casual. We were just getting bubble tea, but it just felt like I wasn't really part of the date. It felt like it was a one-way kind of interview, and I didn't know, like, because even when it's like that, I can tell, like, I can jump in and say stuff, but I couldn't when she just kept talking. And later on, she told me that she does that when she's nervous, and so I could kind of see that. And I ended up going on one more date with her before telling her that I didn't see it going on anywhere or going anywhere. But I know that's not really a horrible story, but I don't know how normal that is.
That poor girl was just so nervous. You just made her so nervous, Ethan. You know, like it's just like I just got to impress this guy.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Let's say that's what happened. Okay. All right. Who's going next?
I'm happy to go. I do want to say that like these stories are like so they're like awkward, endearing, and it's just kind of like oh, but it's like in the moment like this is like kind of like not a great experience. So I had this one instance where I was set up with this individual, and it kind of started out a little weird where the individual was like, do you want to just set up like a pre-call to the date? And I'm like, is this a phone screen? Like, what is this? Like a phone screen date? And I was like,
It's your call with HR.
yeah, I was like, yeah, exactly. Is this like my pre-date screen? And so that was a kind of like initial, I was like, this is a little strange. But I was like, no, like let's just meet up in person, right? Like that's like if it's not even worth it for you to meet in person, like maybe we shouldn't do this. So then we met up in person. And a very nice guy. And it like again, leading up to it was very strange because the individual was like, I'll meet you in front at this time. I'm like, yes, this time. He's like, okay, I'll meet you at this time and this time, this time. I was like, yes, like it's very clear that we are doing it at this time here. So I was like, got the details. And then when we arrived, the individual just could not stop talking about work. And yes, like maybe that is like just very indicative of like the area that, you know, I currently live in, that like everything is about your job. But I learned so much about Google Fiber, like so much about, because they worked at, you know, Google, and they were like the product team for the fiber team. And at that point in time, and he just would not stop talking about Google Fiber. I was like, I know all about it now. I learned about what cities they were launching it in. I learned about like why they chose those cities. It like kind of made me go home and figure out like what my internet speed was. But like I could not like it was like work is not my entire life. Like I even like try to direct the conversation to like, tell me about your family. What is your relationship like? What do you like to do? And it just all came back to Google Fiber. And then I think this is the kicker that makes it like even more awkward. It clearly didn't work out. But then I later saw him at like another like group event from like church. And he pretended he didn't know me. And I was like, I like walked into it and I was like so awkward. And at this time I was dating my husband. And I was like, this just happened. I was like, I think I was like texting him on the side in the event. I was like, I went on a date with him. He's not acknowledging that we've met before. I feel very awkward. Like, what do I do? And then he was like, do you want to just call it out? And I was like, I don't know. I feel like he should call it out, right? Like, it was just like this. I felt all types of uncomfortable. But we ended up just like pretending we never went on this date about Google Fiber. And I wish him the best now. I actually have no idea where he's at. But the conversation about his work so heavily, combined with the aftermath of like ignoring me, trying to pretend it didn't happen, was even stranger. And to this point, I'm like, well, I hope X is doing well. And I have learned that if I went on a date with you before and we meet in another setting, they'll be like, hey, it's great to see you again. I hope you're doing well. And just like leave it at that.
That's wisdom right there. I was going to say, if anyone knows this guy, like a guy who won't shut up about Google Fiber, send him this podcast. I think he could really use it. And hopefully, like, he doesn't need it anymore. Like, maybe he's married or in a relationship, but someone give that guy this podcast.
Okay, my first date horror story was somebody that I was in virtual school with. So I never ever met this person in real life. So we met over a group Teams call. And he like separately like asked me for my number, and I was like, that could be kind of cute, but also kind of strange. And then basically it was like a date like after work. So it was like after like a long day's work, and he was just so unplanned. Not like it needs to be thoroughly planned out, but by the time I was done work, like he like, because okay, I live in Canada, so it was cold outside, so I don't want to be outside walking around forever. He took me to one place and it was closed, and then we had to walk around like all over the place trying to figure out somewhere that was open for us to go. I think it was like a Monday night or something, so places were closing pretty early. And then finally, when we sit down, I had the same experience. He was just talking about himself. He didn't really seem like he wanted to listen. And I knew nothing. Like, I think on a first date, like, I would like to know about your family and like, like stuff that would make me be attracted to you. If you're really close to your family, like that's, like I'd like to figure out my deal breakers and if you have them. But he was just talking about like, I don't know, I felt like stuff that was completely irrelevant. And I think the part that I didn't like the most was we got nachos to share. And that's like what we were eating. And he was chewing with his mouth open too, which I was just like, I mean, I get it. You're hungry after work, like totally fair. But like, also it's a first date. Like you haven't been doing so good. Like, and now you're going to do this. And yeah, by the end of it, like actually way before it ended, I already knew that like, I'm not going to have a second date. Like I was just like, yeah, let me just get through this and then go home. And so when the guy came out with the bill, because I was telling Ethan about this, I think if I know I'm not going to see this person again, I don't want them to invest their money into me. So I would rather also try to contribute and try to pay. And I offered to pay.
Super kind, by the way. I would say like that's a super kind. Yeah.
Yeah, because
that's like really kind
for their money. And so I offered to pay, like, just like for the whole, because like, I don't know, I'm used to like that back and forth. And he's like, oh, you want to pay? Like, okay, sure. And I was just like, okay. So I ended up paying for our entire date, and it was horrible. Oh. And it was cold, and yeah, it was just a really bad time. Like I was more tired by that, I don't know, 1 hour date than I was for my whole day of work. So yeah.
Ugh. Well, that's how you know you don't go on a second date.
Yeah. Son, we need to figure out a way to send this podcast to every single guy out there who's single. This is crazy. This is unacceptable kind of behavior. Man, if you're friends with a single guy, you need to set him straight. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that.
Yeah.
Okay, so to wrap this up, so I'm going to be number 1, Sania's number 2, and then Lydia's 3. And at the count of 3, we're going to hold up our fingers on our vote on whose story is the worst. That person is going to get this candle. Okay?
Okay.
Are you guys ready?
Yes.
1, 2, 3. Okay, Lydia, I'm going to bring this to you next time.
Okay.
I think it was the guy not pretending to not know you at the end, that really was just like the cherry on top.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and in the group setting that we were in, it was like actually pretty small too. So it's like, it wasn't like 100 people. It was like 12.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm like, immediately as he walked through the door, I'm like, I know you, fella. Like, we went on a date, right? We met at this place. I had French fries. You talked about Google Fiber. Like, I know that Google Fiber started in Kansas City because of you, right? That was a big city, that big enough city, but a small enough city. Test out fiber.
A well-deserved
feel
like, I remember it all. Thank you.
I feel like if that guy became a character on our podcast, he would already have a nickname. And I think that also does it for me. That's why you win, Lydia. Yeah, if you're getting a nickname on this podcast, like, I don't know, you're a big star already.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me both on. This was super fun. And hopefully this was, insightful for both of you, and then for any of the listeners. This is great. And thank you for doing a public service to, everybody out there by doing this podcast as well. Much needed.
It's a public service to try to entertain people.
No, you just like giving perspectives on dating. Dating is hard.
Oh yeah. Yeah, if you've heard our tea in previous episodes, like, we definitely agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It is not for the faint of heart. And there are a lot of people who just decide not to do it. Like whether or not it's like online dating or being set up or whatnot. So props
they
to y'all.
Fly to Vegas.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
or just don't date ever, like decide to like just not do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're going to wrap it up here. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode.